Hello, I'm Abigail, a student from Sweetbriar College, and I'm very excited to share with you all what I've been working on. My research involves two separate parts, though they run a little bit of a similar vein. I'm interested in sustainable agricultural practices, several of which are central to this research. Part of what I did was to investigate the potential for forest farming on the Sweetbriar College campus. I looked into literature concerning the topic, had conversations with experts, and visited the forests on campus in July to scope out areas of interest. I'll talk more on this later, but I'd like to get into the other aspect of my research first. I worked with Dr. Powell, professor and director of the Center for Human and Environmental Sustainability, to run field experiments exploring the potential of intercropping mushrooms with various types of plants in order to improve soil health, plant health, and yield. She was based in the community garden on the Sweetbriar campus, and I was able to conduct research remotely from my home garden in Powhatan, Virginia, about an hour and a half from Sweetbriar towards Richmond. The question we were asking was, how does mushroom interplanting affect vegetable cropping systems, including not only direct impacts on plant growth and yield, but also soil quality and composition? So to contextualize that a little bit, soil health is obviously one of the most important factors affecting most types of agriculture. And the soil that we think of is not just rocks and dirt, but actually is described as a living organism. One of the most indicative measures for soil health is SOIL, or soil organic matter content. This is humus, plant residue, and decomposing matter, and it determines many things about a soil's potential for productivity, serves as a bank of nutrients in the soil, and retains water, among other things. In this research, we're hoping to find how growing mushrooms with other plants, intercropping, could affect SOIL. We selected plants to be grown with the mushrooms and settled on tomatoes, corn, and strawberries due to conditional restraints on what could be grown and the literature. A strawberry bed was in place at my house, so we planned to plant mushrooms with them. Corn and tomatoes were planted at both Sweetbriar by Dr. Powell and in Powhatan by myself. Unfortunately, as is sometimes the case of agricultural fieldwork, the Sweetbriar corn was devastated by cutworms, but continued to be grown in Powhatan. Tomatoes were in both locations for observation and testing. We also had to separate testing plots with an underground divider to prevent mycelial spread across areas. Currently, we've planted kale in the research area that already has mycelium to continue observing effects, this time with brassicas, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Our next step was to conduct soil testing across our plots to provide baseline information. We took compository samples from our respective plots and tested them with the soil testing lab out of Virginia Tech. In this picture, you can see the difference between the soil from my garden on the right, which began this process with a very high organic matter content, and the more clayey, more poor soil from the strawberry bed on the left. After that, we moved to planting and mushroom installation. The strawberries were already established, so I installed mushrooms there first. And then after the corn and tomatoes were big enough, Dr. Powell and I put mushrooms in with them as well. Wine caps were the mushrooms we used for this experiment, and they're unique in the fact that for mushrooms, they can deal with a lot of sun exposure. They're able to live on a simple substrate, and they grow relatively quickly. This means that the mushrooms are able to live in the shade of our other vegetables and grow with them, hopefully increasing the soil health at the same time. These pictures show the process of laying straw and wood chips for the mycelia to live in. It's a little bit like a lasagna. Here you can see the populated soil on the left and the control soil on the right. These whitish fibers that look a little bit like mold are actually mycelium as they're breaking down straw and wood in the mulch. This is a few weeks after the mushrooms had been introduced. This is another comparison set of photos showing some pretty remarkable differences between the treated plot and the control plot. At a glance, the treated plants are much more vivacious, they're growing much more healthily, and they have more volume, which is actually pretty remarkable. So as far as quantitative results go, we knew that going in, due to the nature of this kind of thing and the fact that soil health is noticeably impacted over months and years, it was very questionable that results would be observable during the original 8-week research period. So we've since continued the research. This slide shows yield results for tomatoes, which were contradictory across locations, with treated plots in Powhatan averaging just over half a kilo more per plant, and those at Sweetbriar nearly 3/4 of a kilo less. The soil results were a bit more consistent, with a decrease in both pH and organic matter across plots at Sweetbriar. This actually contradicted with our hypothesis when we had proposed that organic matter content would go up with the mushrooms. but it is possible that the SOM decrease was due to nutrient runoff or sampling inconsistencies. One important thing to note is that the cation exchange capacity has increased in the mushroom plot, the treated plot, and this is actually used as another sort of indicator of soil health, and that points to productivity. The work I've just described has primarily focused on laying the groundwork for a more intensive, conclusive study and raised many questions for further research. These include looking into different types of intercrop plants, soil types, mycoremediation, which is using mushrooms to restore polluted or damaged soils, and the practice of agroforestry, or potentially growing mushrooms under a forest canopy. We're also currently investigating the effects on brassicas, with Cahill growing in the plot currently. So as I mentioned before, the most obvious benefit to this study would be more time, which we're adding on to a little bit with the Cahill experiment going on now. We continue to take soil samples and observe the mushrooms and the plot as a whole. Also, the original proposal had this research taking place at Sweetbriar, where there would have been more space for multiple plots and trials. Another thing that could have been improved is more land use history for a greater understanding of the soil as a whole, even before mushroom impact. That's all for the mushroom aspect of my research right now, but there's still the other half that I will go into. Forest farming at Sweetbriar College. This is a type of agroforestry in which forest crops are cultivated underneath an existing canopy of established trees, and I wanted to look into its potential for application on our campus for several reasons. For one thing, it's extremely beneficial type of management for forest health. It would provide educational opportunities to students, and it would be a way for the school to make money, and it would also be a way of paying respects to the original holders of our land, the Monacan people that lived on our campus before our college. Indigenous systems are often what contemporary forest farming models are based off of, and there's a lot of practices within that range that are very good for the forest. Here I've listed some of the ecosystemic benefits of the practice, and you can see in this photo from the North Carolina Extension Office, this is actually ginseng growing in a way that we call wild simulated under a stand of hardwoods. Forest farming is not harmful to the environment, and the type of management that it requires actually allows for the betterment of forest health through things like increased biodiversity, more native species, and invasives control, water and soil health. At Sweetbriar, potential crops include ginseng, golden seal, mushrooms, black cohosh, Solomon seal, bloodroot, and ramps. Most of these plants can be sold as herbal supplements with medical benefits, but ramps and mushrooms are used in culinary applications. So, to get you situated a little bit, these are the areas in which I did some preliminary siting. Ecology Woods circled in purple, Guyon Woods in pink, Wiley's Way in yellow, and Fern Woods in green. And you can see the Sweetbriar campus displayed on this map as well. In order to make some conjectures about what kind of crops we could potentially produce, I had to do some literature review, and I spoke to Gary Canfield, who works at Sweetbriar with the business office and has had a hand in restoring trails and forestry management. Canfield provided good information about the forest in general. Its predominant tree species are listed here. I also talked with Dr. Fink, who has spent a lot of time as an observer of our forest and collected data on certain parts of the forest throughout the years. They both pointed to these challenges as facing our forests, and an implementation of forest farming could actually help to remedy all of them. I was additionally in conversation with Katie Comminder, the Agroforestry Program Director at Appalachian Sustainable Development, and she had a lot to say about the logistics of production and marketing for these kinds of products, and she was very supportive of the idea at an institution like Sweetbriar, citing the successes of Warren Wilson College in North Carolina and the Catawba Sustainability Center at Virginia Tech. In each area, part of my site assessment was taking samples for soil testing, observations of understory, and these I coupled with climate information, topographic information, and land use history for the area. Guyon was one of the least suitable areas with heavy browsing from deer and very little sunlight. However, the crops listed are some that could actually be grown here doing well in heavy shade. This section especially, some of the harvest would need to be forfeited to wildlife. In this soil sample picture is interesting. You can actually see some vinca, that shiny dark green vine on the right side of the picture. That's one of the invasives that we deal with on campus. The ecology looked much better than Guyon, with more developed and diverse understory. The soil was very dense clay, as you can see, but there were still a bunch of crops that would potentially do well here. Fernwoods I thought to be the most suitable, with very successful undergrowth in multiple stages of life, as you can see from this photo. And I've also listed the types of plants that would do well in this area. Additionally, the location of this stand is not far behind the writing center, right off of a road, so it's pretty accessible, which would make management easier and more efficient. Wiley's Way is an interesting area because it was very recently selectively harvested and a lot of younger trees were thinned out, so what remains are older established trees and larger shrubs. It can do a few of the plants as well. So to be more concise with all of this information, Fernwoods, Ecology, and Wiley's Way seem like they will provide the best areas for forest farming to occur in that order. Also, the implementation of forest farming on our campus would coincide with our forestry management goals perfectly, while providing increased educational opportunity to students, revenue, and potentially a better set of relationships with on-campus and surrounding communities. This quote here by Dr. Fink: "I would base decisions solely on educational opportunities and biodiversity conservation, but the board and administration must take economics into account as they make decisions. The beauty of forest farming is that it combines both of these aspects, forest health and potential income, and marries them in a way that would be extraordinarily beneficial to the Sweetbriar community." So thank you, listeners, for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to answer them and engage in conversation with you all. And very quickly, I'd just like to thank a few people for their contributions in this research, especially Dr. Lisa Powell, with whom I worked very closely and has provided extraordinarily valuable influence and guidance in this work. Truly could not have done it without her. Also, Dr. Fink, Dr. Brinkman, Dr. Gervasio, Mr. Canfield, Ms. Katie Commender, the Honors Program, Student Advancement Committee, and Ms. Placidi.